Mole had been working very hard all morning, spring cleaning his little home. There were splashes of whitewash all over his black fur. His back ached and his arms were tired. Suddenly, he threw his brush down. "Bother!" he said. "I'm fed up with spring cleaning."
He bolted out of the house and scrambled up the steep, narrow tunnel that was his front entrance until at last, pop! His snout came out into the sunlight and he found himself on the grass of the great meadow. "This is better than spring cleaning," he said, bounding across the meadow. Suddenly, he came to the bank of the river. He had never seen a river before, and he trotted beside it, listening to the sound of the water. As he looked at the opposite bank, he saw a dark hole. Something bright and small twinkled in it. It was an eye. Then a small face appeared, a brown little face with whiskers. It was the water rat. "Hello, Mole," said the water rat. "Hello, Rat," said the mole. "Would you like to come over?" "How can I get to you?" said Mole. The rat hauled up a little blue and white boat, just the size for two animals. He rowed across and gave Mole his paw to step down timidly into it. The two animals made friends at once. Ratty was very surprised to hear that Mole had never been in a boat before. "There is nothing half so worth doing," he said, "as simply messing about in boats." Then he had an idea. "Why don't we go down the river and make a long day of it?" He fetched a picnic basket filled with cold chicken, cold tongue, ham, beef, pickled onions, salad, French bread, cress, ginger beer, and lemonade, and then rowed them silently down the river, while Mole took in all the new sights, smells, and sounds. "What lies over there?" asked Mole. "Oh, that's just the wildwood. We don't go there much, we river rats." "Aren't they very nice people there?" asked Mole nervously. "Well, the squirrels are all right. The rabbits are a mixed lot, and badgers all right. But there are others, weasels and stoats and foxes and so on. All right in a way, but you can't trust them." Rat and Mole began their picnic. While they were eating, they met one of Rat's friends. It was Mr. Badger, whose stripy head suddenly pushed through the thorny hedge. He grunted, "Company," and disappeared. Mr. Toad was on the river too. He shot past in a brand new racing boat. He was short and fat, splashing badly and rolling from side to side. Toad's always trying something new," said Rat. "Last year he had a houseboat, but he soon gets tired of things." "Hello!" cried Mr. Toad. "Now why don't you two fellows come and join me for some tea?" Mr. Toad lived in a handsome house called Toad Hall. He was rather rich, but not very sensible, and he was keen to show Rat and Mole his new toy. He had bought a gypsy caravan painted bright yellow with red wheels, pulled by an old grey horse. Toad was planning to take his first trip that afternoon, and he persuaded Mole and Rat to go with him. The three of them set out, but before they had gone very far, disaster struck. A magnificent motor car flashed past them, flinging out a cloud of dust. The poor horse was frightened and bolted. The caravan turned over and fell into the ditch. Its windows were smashed, and one wheel came off. Ratty and Mole were furious. "You road hog!" they shouted, shaking their fists. But Toad just sat there in the dust, a dazed look in his eyes, muttering, "Poop, poop!" He did not care about the wrecked caravan. He was already thinking how marvellous it would be to drive a car. Next day on the riverbank, everyone was talking about the latest news. "Have you heard? Toad went up to London by an early train this morning, and he has ordered, what do you think? A large and very expensive motor car." One bright morning in early summer, Badger, who was in fact very warm-hearted despite his gruff manner, went to visit Ratty and Mole. "It's time we did something about Toad," he grunted. "This craze for motor cars is getting him into trouble with the police." "Yes, he's had several crashes," agreed Rat. "I hear he has ordered another new car this week." They set off for Toad Hall. Sure enough, there at the front door stood a shiny, brand-new, bright red motor car. Mr. Toad, in goggles, cap, gaiters, and a huge overcoat, came swaggering down the steps, putting on his big leather driving gloves. "You're just in time for a jolly spin, you fellows," he called out cheerfully. "Oh, no you don't," said Badger, seizing him by the scruff of the neck and marching him back into the house, where he gave him a good talking to. Toad refused to promise to give up driving, so they locked him in his bedroom to think it over. But cunning Toad pretended to be ill, and while they were fetching the doctor, he climbed out of the window and bounced off to the village, laughing and muttering, "Poop, poop." At the inn, he saw a beautiful motor car whose owners were inside having lunch. Toad could not resist trying it out. He hopped in and drove off in a cloud of dust. But the police were soon after him, and before long, Toad found himself sentenced to 20 years in prison. The wretched Toad was handcuffed and marched across the square to the ancient castle, where he was dragged down a spiral stone staircase, down to the deepest dungeon of all, and locked inside. The unhappy Toad realized what a foolish animal he had been. "A wretched animal, so justly punished," he whimpered, then threw himself on his bed, fat tears rolling down his flabby cheeks. But the jailer's daughter was a kind young girl who was very fond of animals. She took pity on Toad, coaxed him to eat some hot buttered toast, and thought of a plan to help him escape. He was to dress up in her aunt's clothes as a washerwoman. Her aunt wore a long cotton dress, a shawl, and an old blue bonnet, and she carried a basket full of washing. Toad did not like the idea of dressing up as a poor old woman, but in the end he agreed. The jailer's daughter giggled as she tied the bonnet strings under Toad's chin. "You look exactly like her," she laughed. "Goodbye and good luck." There were some anxious moments as Toad set off, but Toad entered into the spirit of the thing, for he fancied himself as an actor. Soon he came through the prison gate into the sunlight. He was free at last. He made for the railway station and was about to buy a ticket when he realised he had left his waistcoat with all his money in his cell. What could he do now? Then he spotted the engine driver cleaning down the steam engine. "Oh, sir," he cried, "I'm a poor washerwoman who's lost her purse. How am I to get home, and what will my little children do without me?" The kind engine driver said, "Tell you what, missus, I'll give you a ride on my train, and you can wash some shirts for me when you get home." Toad accepted eagerly and hopped on the engine. They got up steam and set off. Suddenly, the engine driver looked back. "There's another train following," he cried. "It's full of people. Policemen with truncheons, plain clothesmen with bowler hats and umbrellas, and prison wardens with sticks, all shouting, 'Stop! Stop!'" Toad fell to his knees and begged for help. "I am not a washerwoman at all," he confessed. "I am the well-known daring criminal, Mr. Toad. Please, help me." The engine driver hated to see an animal hunted. "Never mind, I'll help you," he said. "When we get through this tunnel, I'll slow down and you can jump off and hide in the wood." The sparks flew as they roared through the tunnel. Then they slowed down. Toad jumped off and rolled down the bank into the wood. He laughed as he saw the other train tear past full of policemen and wardens. Then he found an old tree and lay down on a bed of leaves to wait for morning. Toad Toad was walking along a canal when an old horse plodded past, pulling a gaily painted barge. A stout woman sat in it. Toad saw the chance of a lift, so he told his tale of losing a purse and having to get back to his children. "I'll give you a lift as far as Toad Hall," the barge woman said, "if you'll do my dirty washing for me." Toad had been boasting about what a good washerwoman he was, so he could hardly refuse. The barge woman gave him a great pile of washing, some soap and clean water in a big tub. Toad had no idea how to wash clothes, and soon he was puffing and blowing, rubbing and bubbling. But the clothes were no cleaner. The barge woman took a closer look at him. "You're no washerwoman," she shrieked. "You're a dirty, ugly Toad. Get off my nice, clean barge." With a splash, Toad fell into the water. He swam along, gasping, until he came to a hole in the bank. He clutched the edge and looked in. A small, bright thing shone and moved towards him. A face grew up around it, brown and small, with whiskers. It was the water rat. When Toad had been dried off and given a suit of Ratty's to wear, Rat told him what had happened while he had been away. The wild wooders had taken over Toad Hall. Weasels, ferrets and stoats were living there, eating Toad's food and drinking his drink and telling everybody that he was never coming back. Toad was all for going up there at once and turning them out. But Ratty explained that they had armed guards there and there was no way in. Just then, Badger and Mole came in. "Welcome home, Toad," said Badger. "Alas, what am I saying? This is a poor homecoming. Unhappy Toad." They all began to talk at once until they were silenced by the Badger. "Be quiet, all of you," he growled. "Toad, I'll tell you my plan to get Toad Hall back again. There is an underground passage that comes up inside Toad Hall in the butler's pantry next to the banqueting hall." And the Badger proceeded to outline his plan. When it was dark, they put on their belts and pistols and swords and set off. Badger led the way, flourishing a thick stick. They kept stopping in the darkness and bumped into one another several times. But soon they heard the noise of the feast overhead, the stamping of little feet, the clinking of glasses and cheers. All the weasels, stoats and foxes were gathered in the banqueting hall for the Chief Weasel's birthday party. "Now, boys, all together," said Badger, and they heaved at the trapdoor and burst into the banqueting hall, brandishing their weapons. My, what a squeaking and squealing and screeching filled the air. Terrified weasels dived under the tables. Ferrets rushed madly for the fireplace and got hopelessly stuck in the chimney. The mighty Badger laid about him with his stick. Mole gave a terrible war cry. "A mole! A mole!" Rat flourished his pistol. Toad, swollen with injured pride, went straight for the Chief Weasel. There were only the four of them, but to the wild wooders they seemed like an army. finished, the room was clear, and all the weasels, stoats and foxes fled squeaking back to the wild wood. Mole picked up a broom, put on an apron, and set about tidying up the hall. The next day, Toad gave a banquet to celebrate his homecoming. But this was a reformed Toad. He went quietly downstairs to greet his guests. He refused to take any credit for the victory. No, it was all Badger's idea. Mole and Rat did most of the fighting, he said modestly. Mole and Rat looked at each other. This was indeed an altered Toad.
The four friends sometimes took a stroll together of a summer evening. Respectful mother weasels, stoats and foxes pointed them out to their young ones and told them to behave or the terrible great grey Badger would get them. This was somewhat unfair to Badger, who was fond of children, but it never failed to make them behave.